The reading room felt like ice. Will sat at the head of the mahogany table, his voice steady as he read through the Burke family trust document. I watched his lips move, heard the words, but they didn't make sense at first. Then Paige stood up, her perfectly manicured hand resting on the back of her chair. She announced it coldly, like she was ordering coffee. I had been removed from the family trust. Completely. The room went silent. Nobody looked at me. Not even my husband, who studied his phone like it held the secrets of the universe. 23 years I'd been part of this family. 23 years meant nothing now. Paige's smile was small, controlled. She tilted her head slightly and said the words that would haunt me for months. Dad said you were always an outsider anyway. The statement hung in the air like smoke. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just exclusion. This was erasure. That's when I realized this was a setup. My hands trembled under the table as I gripped my knees. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, the wind knocked clean out of me. Everything moved in slow motion. The lawyer shuffled papers. Someone coughed. Paige sat back down, crossing her legs with satisfaction. She'd won something, and I didn't even know we were playing a game. My name is Allison Burke. Or at least, it used to mean something in this family. I married into wealth, sure, but I earned my place. I worked. I cared. I showed up. And now they were telling me I never belonged at all. I needed to understand how this happened. When did it start? How did I miss it? So I did what I always do when the world stops making sense. I went back to the beginning. Back to when I still believed Paige was family. Back to when I thought loyalty mattered. The charity gala was 3 years ago. I remember it clearly because that was the night I realized Paige had perfected the art of stealing credit. She stood on that stage in her designer gown, the spotlight making her shine like some kind of saint. Everyone applauded. The foundation I had built from the ground up, the one I'd poured countless hours into, was being celebrated. But Paige was accepting the award. She thanked everyone, talked about her vision and dedication, never once mentioning my name. I stood in the back of the ballroom, holding a glass of champagne I didn't want to drink. My husband told me I was being sensitive. That it didn't matter who got credit as long as the work got done. But it did matter. Because that night, I became invisible. Paige became the golden daughter-in-law, the one everyone loved and admired. I became the reliable one in the background. The one who did the work while she took the bows. I should have seen it then. The pattern. The manipulation. But I was too busy being kind. My husband stopped having my back somewhere around that time. I tried to talk to him about it over dinner one night. Just the two of us at home, pasta getting cold on our plates. I explained how Paige had lied about the foundation, how she was taking credit for things she never did. He shrugged, stabbed at his food, and said I was overreacting. It's not that serious, Allison. You're making drama out of nothing. His words stung more than Paige's betrayal. This was supposed to be my partner. My person. But he dismissed me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Later that night, I went to get water from the kitchen. His phone was face up on the counter, screen glowing. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I saw it anyway. A text to Paige. She's upset again. I handled it. My blood turned to ice water. He wasn't just failing to defend me. He was reporting back to her. They were a team. And I was the problem. Dad was dying, and I was the only one there. Not Paige, who lived 20 minutes away. Not my husband, who worked late every single night during those awful months. Just me. I bathed him when he couldn't do it himself. I fed him when his hands shook too much to hold a spoon. After the stroke, he couldn't talk much, but his eyes said everything. He squeezed my hand when I read to him. He smiled when I brought him his favorite soup. Paige visited twice. Both times she stayed less than an hour, posing for photos by his bedside that she posted online with crying emojis. "So hard watching him like this," she wrote. As if she'd been there. As if she cared. But I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because he was family. Because he was alone. Because nobody else would. And slowly, something shifted. He started looking at me differently. With respect. With gratitude. With love. I'd earned something Paige never could. His trust. The day he called me his daughter changed everything. We were sitting in his room, sunlight streaming through the window. He was having a good day, more alert than usual. He reached for my hand and held it with surprising strength. "You're the daughter I should have had," he whispered. His voice was rough but clear. "I'm going to make it right, Allison. I promise you." I didn't understand what he meant at first. Make what right? But then he gestured to his desk. Told me he was updating the trust. That he wanted to fix things. Protect the people who actually cared. He pulled out an old leather notebook and scribbled something inside with shaking hands. Then he locked it in his desk drawer and pocketed the key. "Don't tell anyone yet," he said. "Let me handle this properly." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I thought he meant he was going to include me more formally. I never imagined how much that moment would matter later. Or how Paige would try to erase it completely. When he died, I was the one who found him. It was early morning. I'd stopped by with breakfast like I did every day. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I knew before I even opened his bedroom door. He looked peaceful, like he was sleeping. But he was gone. I called the ambulance. Called the family. Sat with him until they arrived because I couldn't bear the thought of him being alone. Paige wasn't even in the state. She was at some resort in California, posting sunset pictures on social media. She flew back 2 days later for the funeral. And somehow, impossibly, she gave the eulogy. She stood at the podium and cried perfect tears, talking about how close they were. How much time they spent together. How he taught her everything she knew about family values. I sat in the second row and listened to her rewrite history. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked where she'd actually been. They just believed her. Because Paige was golden. And I was invisible. Always invisible. Something was off about the will. We met at the legal office 2 weeks after the funeral. The place smelled like leather and old paper. Paige's lawyer presented the trust documents with the kind of confidence that felt rehearsed. Everything was too smooth. Too polished. The language was precise, clinical, clearly written by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I sat there listening as he explained how the assets would be distributed. Paige got the house. Paige got the majority of the investments. Paige got control of the family foundation. I got nothing. My kids got nothing. It was clean, efficient, and absolute. But something nagged at me. The phrasing. The specific legal terms being used. I'd read thousands of trust documents in my career. This one felt familiar. Like I'd seen this exact style before. Then it clicked. The structure. The clause formations. The way certain protections were worded. I recognized this handwriting. Not literally. But professionally. I knew this lawyer's signature style. And my stomach dropped. Then it hit me. I trained that lawyer. His name was Marcus Thornton, and he'd worked under me for 3 years at the firm before I went part-time to care for Dad. He'd been good. Sharp. Maybe too sharp. I'd taught him everything he knew about trust law and estate planning. And now Paige had hired him to cut me out. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. She thought she was being clever, hiring some hotshot attorney to make everything legal and bulletproof. But she'd brought a knife to a scalpel fight. Because Marcus didn't just learn trust law from me. He learned my techniques. My shortcuts. My preferences. Which meant I could spot every single one of his moves before he made them. I looked across the table at Paige, who was pretending to dab her eyes with a tissue. "You have such a good legal team," I said softly. She smiled, thinking I was complimenting her. I wasn't. I was declaring war. Quietly. Carefully. The way only someone who knows the system inside and out can do. I said nothing. I smiled. I waited. After the meeting, I congratulated Paige on handling everything so professionally. I told Marcus it was good to see him doing so well. I played the part of the gracious loser. The woman who knew when she was beaten. They believed it because that's what they expected. Good old reliable Allison, always taking things lying down. But inside, my mind was racing. If they wanted to erase me, fine. I'd make sure they erased the wrong person. I started pulling records that night. Quietly. Carefully. I still had access to certain databases from my old firm. Still had contacts who owed me favors. I requested copies of filings, cross-referenced dates, checked notary stamps. Everything looked legitimate on the surface. But I knew better. There were always cracks. Always inconsistencies. You just had to know where to look. And I'd spent 15 years learning exactly where to look. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about truth. About making sure Dad's real wishes were honored. About showing Paige that some people can't be erased. Not without a fight. I found the handwriting in an old folder at Dad's house. I'd gone back to collect some personal items, things Paige said I could have. Photographs. Books. Small stuff that didn't matter to her. I was cleaning out his desk when I found it, tucked in the back of a drawer behind some tax documents. His leather notebook. The one he'd written in that day. The one Paige's lawyer claimed didn't exist. My hands shook as I opened it. Page after page of his notes, written in his shaky but unmistakable handwriting. Plans for the trust revision. Names. Percentages. Wishes. And there, highlighted in his own hand, was my name. And my children's names. He'd wanted us protected. He'd wanted us included. This wasn't just evidence. This was his voice from beyond the grave, telling me what really happened. But there was more. Tucked inside the notebook was a small key and a note. Safety Deposit Box 447, First National. Only you, Allison. Only you should see this. My heart hammered. He'd left me something off the books. Something Paige didn't know about. I called the lawyer in for lunch a week later. Marcus agreed immediately, probably thinking I wanted closure or advice. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place where business people pretend to be casual. I asked him about his new practice, congratulated him on the big clients. We talked about old cases, shared a few laughs. Then I steered the conversation toward Dad's estate. It must have been complicated, I said. Especially with his condition toward the end. Marcus nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. It was straightforward, actually. He was very clear about what he wanted. Even after the second stroke. I asked casually. He paused. Just for a second. But that second told me everything. He was still competent, Marcus said carefully. But his eyes flickered. I know, I said, smiling. I was there when he was discharged. 3 months before you filed the final trust. He'd slipped. Said something he shouldn't have known. Because the final trust was dated 2 weeks before Dad's death. When Dad couldn't even hold a pen. There were 2 versions of the trust. I confirmed it 3 days later after calling in every favor I had. Someone at the firm owed me for covering a mistake years ago. They pulled the archived files. One trust had been drafted 4 months before Dad died. That version included me and my children. It had been properly witnessed and notarized. Then it disappeared. Shredded according to the file notes. The second version, the one Paige presented in court, was signed 2 weeks before his death. After his mental decline. After he'd stopped being able to write his own name. The signatures didn't even match. I had medical records proving he was barely conscious during that time. Hospital admission records. Nursing notes. Everything. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was fraud. Criminal fraud. And Paige had gotten Marcus to help her do it. The question was whether Marcus knew what he was doing or if Paige had manipulated him too. Either way, they'd both broken the law. And I had every piece of evidence I needed to prove it. I documented everything. Every email. Every filing. Every timestamp. I interviewed the nurses who'd cared for Dad during his final weeks. They remembered me. They also remembered that Paige only visited once, and Dad had been asleep. I tracked down the witnesses on the second trust. One of them admitted she'd signed papers for Paige as a favor, never actually seeing Dad sign anything. I recorded that conversation. Legally. With her permission. I built my case like I was preparing for trial. Because I was. This was what I'd trained for. What I'd spent my career doing. Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Making sure the law actually served justice. I worked at night after everyone was asleep. I kept files in a locked cabinet only I could access. I played the long game. The patient game. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about making things right. About honoring Dad's real wishes. About protecting my children's inheritance. Paige thought she'd won. She had no idea I was just getting started. Paige smelled blood and went for the kill. She started flaunting her new wealth everywhere. Posted photos of the house she'd inherited, throwing parties for her socialite friends. She bought a new car. Renovated the kitchen. Acted like she'd earned every penny. Then came the dinner party. She invited family and friends, including my husband. I wasn't invited, obviously. But I heard about it afterward. How she'd made a toast to Dad's memory and his wisdom in knowing who truly cared about family. How she'd mentioned, so casually, that my children weren't in the trust either. Such a shame, she'd said, when people show their true colors. My daughter heard about it at school. Someone's mom had been at the party. She came home crying, asking why Grandpa didn't love us anymore. That was when something broke inside me. Paige could humiliate me. She could steal from me. But she would not hurt my children. Not with lies. Not ever. But she didn't know what I had. The caregiver I'd hired to help with Dad during his final months agreed to meet me. Her name was Beatrice, and she remembered everything. She confirmed that Dad was lucid and coherent 4 months before his death when the first trust was written. She also confirmed that 2 weeks before he died, when Paige's version was supposedly signed, he couldn't even recognize his own children. He kept asking for you, Beatrice told me quietly. He called your name until the end. Never hers. I recorded her statement. Had her sign an affidavit. Then I discovered something else. The notary who'd stamped the second trust? Her name was Claire Hendricks. She'd worked under me at the firm 6 years ago. I'd written her a recommendation letter when she'd gotten her license. We'd kept in touch. I called her. Asked if she remembered notarizing a trust for the Burke family. She went quiet. Then she said something that made my blood boil. Paige told me you'd already left. That you didn't want to be there. I never actually saw your father-in-law sign it. My husband crossed the line 2 months after the will reading. I'd been working my case quietly, gathering evidence, building documentation. He noticed I was distant. Distracted. One night, he confronted me. You need to let this go, Allison. You're being toxic. You're obsessing over something that's done. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't know this person anymore. Maybe I never did. I'm not letting fraud go, I said calmly. And I'm not letting someone steal my children's inheritance. He laughed. Actually laughed. This is why nobody takes you seriously. You can't accept that you lost. That was the moment I knew. Our marriage was over. Not because of Paige. Because of him. Because he'd chosen her side over mine. Over our children's. I filed for legal separation the next morning. Quietly. Through a lawyer he didn't know. I didn't tell him until the papers were served. Let him find out the way I found out I'd been erased. Suddenly. Brutally. Without warning. The anonymous complaint landed on Paige's doorstep like a bomb. Then another. And another. I'd submitted my findings to the State Bar Ethics Board under Claire's name, with her permission. She was furious about being used to notarize a fraudulent document. The complaint detailed everything. The timeline inconsistencies. The medical records. The witness statements. The shredded original trust. Each one was a silent missile, carefully aimed and perfectly timed. Marcus received his own complaint. Questions about his professional conduct. His documentation. His due diligence in verifying his client's claims. I didn't sign any of them personally. Didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The board launched an investigation within a week. They sent letters. Requested files. Started asking uncomfortable questions. Paige called me, screaming. I let it go to voicemail. Listened to her rage about betrayal and sabotage. I saved the recording. Just in case. This was just the beginning. The pressure was building. And I was patient enough to let it explode. The trust got frozen 3 weeks later. A judge issued a temporary injunction pending the investigation's outcome. All Burke family assets were locked down. Nobody could access anything. Not the house. Not the investments. Not the foundation accounts. Paige lost access to what she thought was her money overnight. I heard through mutual friends that she'd panicked. Called lawyers. Tried to move money before the freeze took effect. But she was too late. The court had acted faster than she expected. She'd gotten comfortable. Confident. She'd assumed her legal team had covered everything. But they hadn't counted on someone who knew the system as well as they did. Someone who knew exactly which agencies to contact and which forms to file. Someone who understood that justice wasn't about winning quickly. It was about winning completely. I didn't celebrate. I just kept working. Because freezing the trust was only step one. Proving fraud and restoring Dad's original wishes was the real goal. Paige showed up at my door on a Tuesday night. Unannounced. Unhinged. Her hair was a mess, mascara smudged, designer clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. She pounded on the door hard enough to wake the neighbors. When I opened it, she pushed past me into the house. "You did this," she screamed. "You filed those complaints. You froze everything. You're destroying this family." I stayed calm. Crossed my arms. Let her finish her tantrum. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I spoke quietly. "You cut me out of the family, Paige. I just returned the favor." Her face went red. I had every right. Dad wanted me to have everything. "You were never really part of this family." "Then neither are you," I said. "Because Dad's real trust says otherwise. And I have proof." She lunged at me. Actually tried to hit me. I stepped back, and she stumbled. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. Real ones this time. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. I smiled. "No. You will." The lawyer confessed on record 2 weeks later. Marcus Thornton sat across from me and my attorney in a deposition room, looking like he'd aged 10 years. I'd offered him a deal through the ethics board. Tell the truth, and we'd recommend leniency. Stay quiet, and he'd lose his license permanently. He chose truth. Paige came to me 6 months before her father-in-law died, he said into the recorder. She wanted to know how to contest a trust. I told her it was difficult unless there was proof of incompetence or undue influence. He paused, swallowing hard. She asked me to draft a new trust. Said her father had requested it. I didn't verify that claim. I should have. The bombshell came next. 2 weeks before he died, she brought me a signature page. Said he'd signed it at home. I notarized it based on her word. I never actually witnessed him sign anything. My attorney and I exchanged glances. That was it. The confession that would unravel everything. Paige had forged Dad's signature. And Marcus had helped her, knowingly or not. The truth was finally on record. Official. Undeniable. The media caught wind of the story within days. Someone at the courthouse leaked it to a local reporter. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Socialite under investigation for elder trust fraud. The headline was perfect. Devastating. The article detailed Paige's charity work, her social media presence, her reputation as the golden daughter-in-law. Then it tore it all apart. Quoted the ethics investigation. Mentioned the frozen trust. Referenced witness statements about Dad's condition. Paige's face was plastered across the internet. Not in a designer gown at a gala. In a courtroom sketch. Looking guilty. Her husband's company dropped her from the foundation board that afternoon. Issued a statement about integrity and values. Her friends stopped answering her calls. The invitations dried up. She'd built her entire identity on being the perfect socialite. The beloved family member. Now everyone knew the truth. She was a fraud. And frauds don't get second chances in high society. They get exiled. The final court hearing happened on a cold November morning. I walked into that courtroom calm and prepared. I'd spent 8 months building this case. Every document was organized. Every witness was ready. Every argument was airtight. Paige looked like she'd been through war. Her lawyer was new, the third one she'd hired. Marcus had lost his license pending review. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. The judge reviewed everything. The medical records. The conflicting trusts. Marcus's confession. The witness statements. Dad's handwritten notes from his leather notebook. It took 4 hours. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom went silent. The trust dated 6 months prior to the deceased's death is hereby reinstated as the valid and legal document. The subsequent filing is declared null and void due to fraud. I felt something release in my chest. Not triumph. Relief. My children and I were back in. Dad's real wishes were honored. Paige had lost everything. Paige lost everything in the aftermath. The house went under investigation as part of the estate. She couldn't live there anymore. Her legal fees mounted into 6 figures. Her reputation imploded so completely that she had to delete her social media accounts. She wasn't arrested. The prosecutor decided there wasn't enough evidence to prove she'd personally forged the signature. Maybe she'd convinced herself Dad had wanted those changes. Maybe she'd lied so much she believed her own story. It didn't matter. She got something worse than jail time. She got exiled. Cut off from the social circles she'd spent years cultivating. Blacklisted from the charity boards she'd used to build her image. Nobody wanted to be associated with her anymore. Her power had always been performative. Built on appearances and lies. Once those crumbled, there was nothing left. She moved to another state, I heard. Started over somewhere nobody knew her name. Sometimes the best justice isn't punishment. It's consequences. Real ones that can't be bought or charmed away. I left the family but took back my name. Once the trust was settled and my children's inheritance secured, I sold my share of the estate. I didn't want the house or the foundation or any of it. Too many bad memories. Too much betrayal. I bought a small home across town. Enrolled my kids in new schools. Filed for divorce officially. Started rebuilding the life Paige had tried to destroy. My name was off the Burke line, but I didn't care. I'd never needed their name to define me. I'd needed justice. Truth. Protection for my children. And I got all three. People ask me sometimes if it was worth it. 8 months of investigation. The legal fees. The stress. The loneliness of fighting alone. I always give them the same answer. Yes. Because you can cut someone out of a trust, but you can't cut them out of the truth. And I kept every receipt. Every document. Every recording. Every piece of evidence that proved I mattered. That Dad loved me. That I wasn't the outsider they tried to make me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's simply refusing to be erased.